thank you again and welcome, and thank you for joining. So my name is Christoph Katz. I'm a senior advisor and board member at EPPA in Brussels, and with me is Dr. John Albaya. He will guide you and provide you an overview on data sharing. He's from TSSG Consultant, obviously, as you know. So maybe while we're while we're starting, a few general remarks. So given that we're a larger audience, you will not be able to see the entire participants list due to data privacy concerns. More importantly, on the right side, typically of your screen, you will see a question and answers box, and you should be able to enter your questions there, and we will collect them and we'll answer them at the end. So obviously that is something where you have the opportunity to react to immediately. And then we will record this presentation, and you will also receive a copy, a link to this recording, and together with a PowerPoint, so you will be able to see that and have a link to this one. Only very briefly about EPPA, specialist consultancy company established in 1987. We're talking about knowledge, we're talking relationship, we're talking facts, and we're talking competence, and we're talking a track record in Europe. And let me, let's say, end here and go to the next slide. So first of all, why are we talking UK reach? It is very clear from this slide immediately that the chemical industry, or the industry that is relevant to where reach is relevant, is just, even if you just look at the chemical industry alone and not all the downstream users and downstream industries, it's very important to the UK economy. That becomes very clear when you look at this. And also, if you look at imports and exports, so if you look at the trade balance, both from a UK perspective and from an EU perspective, this is a very important sector in international trade flows. It is very many materials. It is huge amounts of flows that go into the UK and out of the UK. So this is an important industry. And if you look at this situation, before on the EU reach, you had all items in place. Let's assume for a moment you are the green company in that green box. Maybe you had some raw materials coming in, you supply to your customers. Maybe you have a special production setup that maybe even includes some, let's say, materials produced in other countries and transported back and forth. And right now, this is obviously undergoing a change. And this change means you have to take a look at, from a UK company perspective, there are new rules, new processes, maybe role changes, maybe you have impacts on your raw material changes. And also, if you are exporting and importing materials, there is also an impact on you. And this is why this is important. If you look at this, also in the past, the UK has been a very high contributor to EU reach. So more than 10,000 REACH registrations were held in the UK. So it's a top 3 country in this particular element. So if you look at that, just a few items on UK reach basic principles. First of all, first and foremost, it is about the protection of human health and the environment. And that means including a couple of methods items, including around the circulation of substances. It is also important that it relates to the manufacturing, the placing in the market, and the use of substances. And that can be as a substance itself, in mixtures or in articles. And one more point that is important, and John will come back to that later on, is right now, as this relates, what is called UK reach does not include the Northern Ireland area. So according to the Northern Ireland Protocol, EU reach is still applicable and continues to regulate substances for the Northern Ireland market. And then if you look at the coverage, if you look at what really UK REACH covers, it covers essentially the main activities that have also been covered under EU REACH. So it's about registration, notification of substances. It is about evaluation of dossiers, about evaluation of testing proposals, and so on. It's about authorization of substances that have an authorization requirement. It's about restrictions. And we have seen in the last couple of years more and more of those and broader of those. And it's about all the other process items like priority setting, like enforcement, like all the other elements that help to run a very helpful process. So with that, let me stop with the general introduction and let me hand over to John, who will now guide you through all the important elements. Over to you, John.
Okay, thank you very much for giving a short introduction to UK REACH there, Christoph. So I'm now going to start by giving a short introduction to TSSG, an outline of the recent downstream user import notification submissions that have just been completed. And then I'll move on to talk about the next steps towards completing a new registration. After that, I'll then talk about 3 key aspects of data sharing for UK REACH as I would see them, and what to consider if you are a data owner or need data for use under UK REACH. So, as a little bit of an introduction into TSSG, we have been a provider of chemical regulatory services for over 30 years now. We're part of Science Group company, which is listed on the London AIM Stock Exchange. And we have an EU company and a sister US company covering similar areas of the regulatory sphere with around 100, just over 100 professionals in both companies combined. In TSSG EU, we work mostly with REACH, pesticides and biocides regulation. And going into that, we manage over 20 REACH consortia, supporting over 120 different substances. We do lots of only representative work, and we will be doing only representative work for a lot of UK companies now. We've submitted a REACH authorization under UK REACH, so we do have that experience, and we have plenty of other REACH services, including lead dossier preparation and update, CSR preparation. And also just to highlight that we do have regional offices throughout the EU, and they can help with national registrations, for example, for pesticides and biocides. I think it's also good to highlight that we do have excellent experience at TSSG with some of our colleagues. So Richard Bishop recently joined TSSG 3 months ago from the UK's Health and Safety Executive, and the Health and Safety Executive are the government authority in control of UK REACH, and he was the principal inspector. He led enforcement teams for REACH, amongst other things. We also have Mike Potts. He also very recently joined TSSG, and he has 31 years at the Health and Safety Executive. Andrew Fazey is an associate of ours at TSSG, and he's got huge experience with both REACH and CLP. He worked at EPPA, the Commission, and he was on the Board of Appeal for EPPA for 10 years as the technically qualified member. Steve Buchanan, he was at EPPA for 11 years, and he joined TSSG around 2 years ago. He was a scientific officer, and when he left, he was the deputy head of the data sharing unit. So let's talk a little bit about the downstream user import notifications. So the deadline for this has now complete. So as Christoph said a little bit earlier, UK REACH applies to Great Britain only. So the UK, or the United Kingdom, is composed of England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. And Great Britain is composed of England, Wales and Scotland. UK REACH strictly only applies to Great Britain, and EU REACH continues to apply in Northern Ireland under the terms of the Northern Ireland Protocol. So the downstream user, and also as a bit of another reminder, grandfathering submission deadline was passed in April 2021. So the grandfather registrations were essential for GB companies that held or did hold EU REACH registrations. The downstream user import notifications were required for Great Britain entities that were importing substances into Great Britain from the EU or from outside the EU via an OR agreement. So these were typically GB companies that were downstream users under EU REACH and became GB importers because of Brexit. And also there were the GB ORs appointed by manufacturers and formulators outside Great Britain. So these were EU companies, or at least non-UK companies, that wanted to sell their goods into Great Britain. So the downstream user import notifications essentially had to include some basic information about the registration and the substances supported. The submission deadline was 300 days after the end of the transition arrangement, and that was passed on the 27th of October 2021. So now it is an offence to be importing a substance without a downstream user import notification in place. So enforcement activity is possible now because of this. The system is currently in place to continue to submit a downstream user import notification, but submission should be done as soon as possible. And of course, TSG can help with this. So the next stage in the process for those who have completed an inquiry dossier, a downstream user import notification, is to submit an inquiry dossier. Now, an inquiry dossier is only required for those who submitted downstream user import notifications, not for those who grandfathered. This is essentially because the information required in the downstream user import notifications, such as the information on identification, composition, analytical data, uses, and manufacturing sites, were contained within the grandfather submission. The inquiry dossier is prepared in iEuclid and then submitted via a comply with REACH service. And at the moment, the information requirements are in the UK are identical to the EU data requirements. And of course, just to highlight that data should be on the specific source of or sources manufactured or imported into Great Britain. After this, once the submission is made, the HSE will review and approve the submission, provided it's acceptable, and then provide an inquiry number. Once approved, registrants will automatically be put into a substance group, which is equivalent to the SIF under EU REACH, so the Substance Information Exchange Forum. And this substance group will decide who should be the lead registrant for UK REACH. Working with companies so far, our general advice is to probably submit the inquiry dossier now and join the substance group, since it will be required anyway, and it will give companies more control over data sharing and the appointment of the lead registrant. So once the inquiry dossier is submitted, or if you've grandfathered the registration, you would jump straight to the new registration. And this is how it is for EU REACH, where one company must submit a lead dossier and the remaining companies submit a non-lead dossier. This is prepared in iEuclid, and each legal entity must submit their own dossier. Registration fees apply, and this would be the same with all with an EU REACH registration. All submissions require the payment of registration fees, and the amounts are contained within the regulation itself. The lead or non-lead dossier is prepared in iEuclid and submitted via the Comply with REACH service, and submission is only possible with an inquiry number for those who have made the submission via doings. So at the moment, we understand the data requirements for EU REACH are the same as UK REACH. And of course, for those of you who are familiar with REACH, generally the main difference between the lead dossier and the non-lead dossier is the study data contained within. So the submission deadline that is required for new registrations are on the screen there. So Annex 10 substances, so substances imported or manufactured in the UK at greater than 1,000 tonnes, have to be the dossiers have to be submitted in October 2023, and this is also needed for substances classified under CLP as carcinogenic, mutagenic, and toxic to reproduction at Category 1, or substances classified under CLP for acute or chronic aquatic toxicity, Category 1. And then as the tonnage deadlines go down, so 100 tonnes, so Annex 9 registration, that needs to be submitted in 2025, and then Annex 7 and 8 registrations by October 2027. Again, those with downstream user import notifications must submit an inquiry dossier first. It has to be approved and a new registration submitted before these deadlines. Strictly, those deadlines are in the regulation itself, but just to highlight, many articles of the REACH regulation can be and have been amended via secondary legislation. So what this means is that amendments can be made directly by a government minister and don't need to be approved by Parliament. So changes to different articles within the UK REACH regulation can be made directly by the UK government minister rather than by an act of Parliament, which simply means that these can be quicker and easier. So it's this potential for the UK REACH regulation to change. The new registration, so as I just highlighted, one registrant must become the lead registrant and submit a joint registration dossier containing all the relevant study information. We've got some information about this from the UK HSE via the help desk, and I think it'd perhaps be good to read some of it out just to understand the help and HSE's position on the information that's required for a lead registration and how that should be made. So before claiming the lead role, all members of a substance group should discuss and agree who the lead registrant should be, and also discuss data sharing and agree the contents of the joint registration dossier. This needs to be done outside the UK REACH IT system. The lead registrant should prepare a compliant lead registration dossier containing the full information requirements. The lead registration dossier itself cannot contain any waiver statements. So at this stage, it's not possible to submit the lead dossier and simply rely on waivers for some of the endpoints because the data is not yet available for use under UK REACH by the lead registrant. Only once the lead registration dossier containing all the data required for the highest tonnage band covered by the joint submission has been submitted and passed the completeness check, can the registrant claim the lead role in the comply with UK REACH service. So I think that's important to highlight, that the lead registration dossier must be submitted. It must pass the completeness check before the lead registration role, the lead registrant role, can be claimed. If the lead registrant does not have access to all the data required for registration now, the lead registration role should not yet be claimed. And this is simply because the lead registrant role only needs to be claimed before the relevant deadline for the information is in line with the registration dossier. So the lead dossier data requirements, for those of you who perhaps aren't familiar with EU REACH, concerns PhysChem, environmental fate, ecotox, and the human health properties. So these data are submitted in the lead dossier in sections 4 to 7 of our Euclid. The information requirements do vary depending on how much substance is manufactured or imported into the UK. So Annex 7 registrations have a lower data requirement compared with 8, 9 and 10 is the highest tonnage at greater than 1,000 tonnes. The UK REACH information requirements are currently identical to EU REACH. So if we look at it from the point of view of existing substances registered in the EU, sufficient data should have been submitted to EPPA to comply with the requirements of EU REACH. So how can the EU data be used for registrants for UK REACH registration? So perhaps you can look at the data which is in a lead registration. You perhaps can split the data into two. So there is data with limited or no use restrictions, which would include published data and reference books or other publicly available information. And then separately, there would be perhaps data with use restrictions that apply. So these would be proprietary studies, so studies that have been run by a company and owned by a company, the robust study summaries themselves, the chemical safety report, which is generated, and potentially other information as well in the lead dossier. So, for example, that would be a read-across assessment framework document if the lead dossier is supported by data on another substance, or potentially now literature search data which has been run. And if a company holds access to the data like this under EU REACH, it is usually only solely to comply with EU REACH. So it can't be necessarily used for UK REACH registration without further discussions and agreements on rights. However, we potentially have now seen this changing with LOA inquiries, where we do often get asked, is the EU data now available via UK REACH? So let's now move on to talk about the three main data sharing items that I would say are there for UK REACH. So originally the plan, when discussions were taking place between the UK government and the EU, was to rely on Article 20 of EU REACH. Now this says that information received by the agency, so EPPA submitted for the purposes of EU REACH, may be disclosed to any government or national authority of a third country or international organisation in accordance with an agreement concluded between the community and the third party. So the original idea behind this was that an agreement would be put in place between the EU and the UK that would enable the EU data to be disclosed directly by the EU to the UK. This would mean that the UK government would have the data, the EU REACH data themselves. However, what's a draft agreement between the EU and the UK covering this data was made available. No agreement was ever put into place or is planned now between the UK and EU covering the EU REACH data. So for the foreseeable future, at least, this is not possible. Separately, it's perhaps good to consider the 12-year rule that is written into EU REACH and UK REACH. And what this means is that under REACH Article 27, studies that are submitted under EU REACH can be used by other registrants 12 years or more, so other registrants of the same substance, 12 years or more after submission without the need for financial compensation. So essentially, existing registrants must not claim financial compensation from new registrants as they come in to join the joint submission. So the data is protected for 12 years, the study data is protected, and there you can see the phase-in submission deadlines, so 2020, 2013 and 2018 for EU REACH. And that means that data submitted for the 2010 REACH deadline will become available for registrants to use without financial compensation in December 2022, and so on for the different registrations. I'd also highlight that read across is possible for use under the 12-year rule. So it's possible to put a case to EPPA and justify the use of existing EU data out of protection, and the EPPA may grant the use of the data for another registration out of protection. And it's important to highlight here that the UK REACH regulation includes the same deadlines as the EU REACH. And here is a table comparing the different deadlines. So for a REACH Annex 10 registration required for substances that are manufactured in the EU at greater than manufactured or imported at greater than 1,000 tonnes per year, the phase-in deadline was 2020. After this, 12 years later, the data that was submitted for the deadline becomes out of protection. Yet the UK REACH dossier submission deadline is 2023, so the EU data becomes out of protection in December 2022, but that can potentially be made available for the UK REACH submission in 2023. So there is potential access for the data without compensation. However, for the lower tonnage band, so for example, an Annex 8 registration, the EU phase-in deadline was 2018, and this would become out of protection 12 years later in 2030, yet currently the REACH UK submission deadline is October 2027, so the data wouldn't be available for submission under UK REACH via the 12-year rule. However, of course, as I've highlighted, the UK REACH, we have no indication of this at all, but it is possible that the UK REACH deadlines can be amended. However, just to consider some potential issues around the 12-year rule. So just to start here to highlight that, importantly, data owners are free to choose the data, who they share the data with. This only considers here data owners that are obliged to share the data under UK REACH data sharing rules without compensation under the 12-year rule. To start to be required to share the data submitter needs to be in legitimate possession of the data rather than just have the right to refer. So if the data are owned jointly, for example, by a consortium, individual members of the consortium are actually not likely to be in legitimate possession, in that scenario would not be required to share the data for UK REACH. Also, of course, EU REACH registrants may have bought access to the joint submission dossier, and they would only have bought access, and they too would not be in legitimate possession and therefore not be required to share the data for UK REACH. Of course, as time goes on, ever more new data are submitted to under EU REACH, which were submitted after the phase-in deadline. So, for example, many of the tox studies that were performed in response to substance evaluations or compliance check decisions by EPPA were submitted after the phase-in deadline. And these data that was submitted after the phase-in deadline will only be available for use without compensation 12 years after the date of submission, and so not likely to be freely available for UK REACH submission deadlines. Data owners only need to share data with registrants of that substance. So, for example, if a company owns a data under EU REACH, for one substance, they don't need to register, and they don't register that substance under UK REACH. UK REACH data sharing rules do not apply. So just to highlight that again, if a company owns data on one substance under EU REACH, but they do not submit a registration for that substance under UK REACH, there wouldn't be an obligation to share the data under the UK REACH registration. And based on the recent EPPA statistics, around 40% of EU registrants are at 100 around 40% of EU registrations are at 100 tonnes per annum or lower. And as we've seen from the previous slide, the UK submission deadline at these tonnages are less than 12 years from the EU submission deadline. Therefore, sharing without compensation would not apply to these substances. Another point that we have seen with regards to EU data, with regards to UK data sharing, is a proposal that was made by the UK chemicals industry. So around 25 different industry groups made a proposal in February 2021, and that would require companies to submit relevant information necessary to enable appropriate risk management measures to be identified. And under this, the default position of UK REACH would be that proprietary studies would not be needed, and therefore the UK REACH lead submissions would rely on basic publicly available publications data for the vast majority of substances. This was put to the government, and then separately in response, the Health and Safety Executive and DEFRA, so DEFRA are actually the Department of Food and Rural Affairs, and they're the policy lead for UK REACH, even though they're not actually the government body responsible for the UK REACH. They made a separate proposal, which would mean that full data sets for new substances, so this would be substances that weren't registered under EU REACH, and ones of serious concern, so CMRs, substances that meet the criteria of persistent, bioaccumulative and toxic, and PVPB. The remaining substances would in turn rely on publicly available information. We heard in September that DEFRA confirmed that the UK government ministers were still actively considering these industry proposals. I followed up with the REACH HSE help desk last week, and the response back was that ministers are still considering the proposals put forward by industry, but there's no information on this to share. Of course, this would have a huge impact on the need for data access, because the UK would only need public studies for the vast majority of substances. So data sharing would not be needed for a whole huge number of studies that have been submitted for EU REACH. However, perhaps this is now a little bit less likely due to the recent 2021 Environment Act, which recently was approved by Parliament in early November. And this essentially said that the article that covers UK REACH data requirements cannot be amended via secondary legislation. So in order to enact the changes to UK REACH, which would mean that many registrants could rely on published data, the UK REACH text would need to be amended by Parliament and not just by a secondary legislation of the government ministers. So those are, I think, the three key areas of data sharing for UK REACH. So bearing in that in mind, what may data owners need to do? So what would grantees, so they would be the companies that would want access to data under UK REACH. So what they should consider when they need access to data for UK REACH. Many companies are now choosing to submit a lead registration. ASAP. So it's clear that registrations will be needed in due course anyway. So if they're needed now, many companies are taking the decision that they may as well submit the lead dossiers now to avoid any further complications possible. Companies can check existing data sharing agreements. So typically, data sharing agreements will give you access to data for a specific regulatory regime, so EU REACH. But it may be that you have access to the data for other regimes, or there may be less controls over what can be done with the data. So it's important, I think, to check existing data sharing agreements to work out how the data can be used that's already available. And this potentially can include the existing joint submission agreements for REACH to join the joint submission for EU REACH. It perhaps is good to check with the data only now. So many companies and consortia are sharing data for use under UK REACH with existing EU registrants for free. So many companies have taken this decision that the data that they own, they would let existing EU registrants be able to use the data for a registration of the same substance under UK REACH for free or without compensation. And companies we have seen taking that decision and potentially only just simply charging an admin fee for additional access rights to the data. So something like €1,000 to enable a data sharing agreement. The complication with this is typically that companies that don't hold an EU registration may now be asked to pay for access to the data to use it for UK REACH. And we are seeing now potential requests and pricing for data around this as to what non-EU registrants would be asked to pay. And typically we would do that, and companies that we work with have done that by often comparing the size of the EU market with the UK market to get an estimation of how much the data should be charged for. Companies should also consider whether sub-licensing is wanted. So sub-licensing essentially allows the grantee, so the company that buys access to the data, the right to sell or share the data with other registrants of that substance. So in this case, it would be to share it with other registrants of the substance under UK REACH. And this can be benefit because potentially it means there's less administration involved. So the data owner needs to potentially only sign one data sharing agreement, and they can charge more, and then the company with access to the data for UK REACH can sell access to that data for UK REACH to other registrants. And perhaps is also the downside that it gives the data owner less control over what the data is used for under UK REACH, although within the confines of the data sharing agreement. I'd say from our consortia experience, having or giving sub-licenses tends to be the default approach taken by many companies. When a company does approach for access to the data under UK REACH, you may want to also ask for access to the data under other regulatory regimes. So companies may have a registration or may want to submit a registration under Korean REACH, Turkish REACH, Taiwan, or for read across for EU REACH. And sometimes it can be beneficial to ask for data for UK REACH alongside asking data for other regulatory regimes. And I think it's also a good idea to actually check what will be shared. So understanding the terms of the data sharing agreement, what data will be shared. So typically it will be a summary of the study itself and the agreement that simply says that they have the access is to the access is given to the data for UK Reach, it's very unusual for actually a copy of the study report itself to be shared when access is given. And then from the other side, similarly, what to do if you own Reach data. So as we've seen earlier, this only applies to data sharing rules will only apply to companies with legitimate possession of the data, and companies without legitimate possession will not be obliged to share data under UK Reach. Data sharing rules will apply only to the substance that the data owners register under UK Reach. So as I said, if you own data on one substance, but you don't register that substance under UK Reach, data sharing rules would not apply for the data that's covered. Check, of course, when the data was submitted under EU Reach. So if you have submitted that data under EU Reach, it's important perhaps consider whether the 12-year rule would apply to this, as I outlined a few slides ago. Separately, another thing to highlight is that many companies do not like the perception of profiting from animal testing. So companies just don't want any perception at all that they have asked for additional money for the data beyond what the cost was to generate the study and associated costs. So in that scenario, you may want to consider just charging, say, an admin fee for the data. Consider, do you want to charge sub-licensing rights for the data, and also consider including other data sharing requests, as we saw earlier. So if a company wants access to K-Reach or Turkish Reach for the data, consider including UK Reach at the same time. And I think it's also important to just keep an eye out for the UK government's decision on the industry data sharing proposal, as this can have a huge impact on data sharing. And then just to finish off for the talk, I'd say the key takeaways for me would be that UK Reach can change at any time. It has been amended significantly over the time since it was first published in 2019, and the acceptance of the UK industry sharing proposal is yet unknown, and we are waiting for guidance from the HSE on this, and it will be made known in due course. But this can have a huge impact on the need to share data. The 12-year rule that we've seen will not solve the data sharing requirements necessarily, all data sharing requirements. So the criteria where they would apply, so as we've seen that UK data sharing obligations included in the 12-year rule will only apply to the data owners if they register that substance under UK Reach, they are in legitimate possession of the data, so consortium data may well not be covered by that. If the data was submitted for the phasing deadlines only, so data that was submitted after may well not be available for the UK Reach deadline, and it will apply only to data submitted to address EU Reach Annex 9 and 10 registrations, because the deadlines for the Annex 7 and 8 Reach registration submissions are after the deadline. 2 years is not a long time to organise data sharing, so consider to start now. If the submission needed is at Annex 10, it can take a long time to negotiate data sharing, so it will be a good idea to start now. Data sharing is complex and it can take a long time. We've managed a large number of consortia and work on perhaps at least one data sharing request for those consortia a week. So we have experience of this, and TSG can help with data sharing requests. So thank you all for listening, and I'd like to pass back over to Christoph now.
All right, thanks a lot, John, for this very interesting document and presentation for this one. So I've noted down a couple of few important points from my perspective, and let me just pass them on. So first of all, the Danes is still possible, but it is important to hurry up if anybody has not submitted yet by the deadline. It is also important right now to submit the inquiry dossier right now rather than wait. The deadlines that you mentioned are fixed, but change is possible and maybe easier than it was in the past in certain other situations. It is important to agree on the lead registrant and discuss the data sharing. The data requirements are currently identical to EU REACH. There is no EU-UK agreement on REACH data, as you highlighted on one of the slides. The 12-year rule applies, but at the same time, the devil is in the details, like you've shown on your nice slide on this one. There is a UK industry proposal under consideration for data sharing, but the respective authorities are still considering that one, and it's still under discussions. And there was two very important elements related to data sharing. One slide where you mentioned if you need data, and other one if you own data, and this is obviously as important. And then last but not least, like you said, it is important to start now, because 2 years is indeed is going to pass on very quickly. All right, let's then move on to questions, and I already have the first one here for you. So, very pragmatic one. Where do I find a list of the studies submitted to EU REACH?
Okay, so perhaps the best way to find that would be to go to the EPPA website and search via the substance name or the CAS number, find the entry on via searching, and then click on to find the brief profile. Once you have this, you can click on to see the disseminated dossier. So when a company registers the substance under UK REACH, they submit the dossier. This dossier is then uploaded to the EPPA website and made freely available with sanitized information, and the disseminated dossier is free to review. So you can go into the disseminated dossier and see all the studies that have been submitted to address the joint registration, whilst the details of the studies themselves, so study titles, authors, dates, aren't yet available on the disseminated dossier. All the information around the study, the results, the conclusion is available there, and the link to the study are available and unique to each entry. So on the basis of that, you can see all the data that have been submitted under EU REACH via the EPPA website, and that will give you an idea what data has been submitted and what data is available to use potentially for UK REACH registration.
And then as a follow-up question to that one, will that also allow you to find out who the EU data owner is?
So no, but if you go to the EPPA website again, search on the EPPA website, go to the disseminated dossier, under the administrative page, you can see who the registrants are of that substance, and often it can be a small list or it can be a very long list depending on the substance in question. But from that you can see a list, and sometimes there's a bit of an idea as a guess that the lead registrant, who has typically owns the data or has been involved in getting access to the data included in the lead dossier, it is often so easy to find out who the lead registrant is by, they typically, as a guess, will have submitted in 2010, depending if it's an Annex 10 substance and for the lower tonnage band. So they will have been one of the first to submit. And typically also the lead registrant has updated their dossier most frequently compared with the other registrants. So that can often give you an idea potentially who the lead registrants should be. Or there's the Chemical Watch service. So if you search Chemical Watch Consortia, you can go onto the website and you can search by a CAS consortium name, and that will give the contact details of the consortium or the lead registrant, and that they would be then the best contact for getting access to the data. They can be contacted to ask what data is available in the lead dossier and has UK REACH data sharing been made available. And if the lead registrant or the consortium isn't the data owner, they can often then put you in contact with who the data owner is.
Okay, another very pragmatic question, like how long does the data sharing discussions and negotiations typically take from really the initial request to receiving the data?
So I would say it can be very, very quick, or it can take an awfully long time. So potentially anywhere from about 1 month to sometimes over a year. So the process is typically the applicant, the potential grantee, will contact the data owner and ask them for access to the data. They will list their conditions, what data they want, what substance they want to use the data for, what regulatory regimes, and potentially whether sub-licensing. Once the information is sent on, the data owner will typically consider that information and then get back to the potential grantee with a blank data sharing agreement and information on the cost that will be charged. Once the data sharing agreement's approved, typically the data owner would send an invoice to the grantee arranging payment. Once payment's received, then the data owner will transfer the data as instructed in the data sharing agreement. So just as a bit of a background, that's the process, but the actual the discussions, negotiations, if you like, can take anywhere from 1 or 2 months all the way over to a year.
Okay, thank you for that. And now it's a combination of two questions. First is, let's say we have identified additional substances we want to register under UK REACH. How should we do this? And maybe as an add-on to that question, you mentioned also the inquiry to the UK REACH service. Is this done by mail or what's the pathway?
So as I understand it, sorry, Christoph, to make an inquiry, if it was to submit an inquiry dossier, so that would be a submission via the comply with REACH account in Euclid, but actually to get a question from the health and safety executive, you would log on, you would go to the HSE website, and there is an email address where you can email the REACH CLP help desk, or different email addresses if you want to talk about a specific registration that's already been made. Sorry, Christoph, and what was the first part of the question?
Yeah, the first question is, we have identified additional substances we want to register under UK REACH, and how should we do this?
So if you want to register additional substances under UK REACH, if this registration is done via the downstream user import notifications, then I think, as I highlighted earlier, contact the health and safety executive as soon as possible, because the deadline has now passed. Strictly, you would be not in compliance with UK REACH, but contact the health and safety executive now, outline the situation, and prepare the doing as soon as possible. and submit based on what the health and safety executive instructs. But the portal is still available for submission now, and submission can be made, but this should be discussed with the HSE.
Okay, thank you. I have one more question here for you. Do these REACH data sharing rules also apply to types of non-study data, like say a chemical safety report or something like that?
So data sharing rules would only apply to the studies. So what would happen is the studies need to be shared, and with that you would also need to share a copy of the study summary, the robust study summary. But additional data submitted for EU REACH, like chemical safety report, isn't covered under data sharing rules.
Okay, I think we're approaching the end, so I think we have time for one more question. So is there a list of HSE notified substances on their website available already?
I think, as I recall, yes, there is. I would need to double check, but I think I have seen a list, an Excel file of all the substances that have been registered under UK REACH. And potentially I can follow up with that after the call via email.
Okay, and as we're actually running out of time, so it's time to close. But what we will do is we have received more questions than we were able to answer right now. So what you will receive as an audience is a couple of things. First of all, you will receive in the next coming days a link with a presentation, and of course, we will get in touch with you with those questions that we couldn't answer right now. So you will receive the answers to those questions in the coming days. So I would like to thank all of you for participating. I would like to thank John for the nice presentation, answering all the questions. That was certainly a tough job. And then obviously I would thank the organizing team on TSG side for organizing this webinar. So thanks a lot also as well, Lucy and Christina and whoever else contributed. So thanks to all of you, and I wish you a nice day.
And thank you, Christoph. Thanks.